The tension in classroom 207 at Westlake Academy was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus Johnson stood frozen at the front of the room, his heart hammering against his ribcage as Ms. Winters circled him like a predator stalking its prey. Her thin lips were pressed into a tight line of disapproval, her reading glasses dangling from a chain around her neck, swinging with each deliberate step she took. "Would you care to explain this, Mr. Johnson?" Her voice cut through the silence, sharp and accusatory. She held up his math exam, the red A+ at the top circled multiple times, as if the grade itself were evidence of some terrible crime. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Explain what, Ms. Winters?" His voice came out steadier than he expected, given how his knees felt like they might buckle at any moment. The other students watched in uncomfortable silence. Some stared down at their desks, pretending not to notice the spectacle unfolding before them. Others exchanged knowing glances. They'd seen this before, just never quite this public, never quite this raw. "Explain," Ms. Winters said, tapping a manicured nail against his test paper, "how you, of all people, managed to score a perfect 100 on the most difficult calculus exam I've given in 15 years of teaching." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. "You cheated. Because someone like you couldn't possibly have earned this grade legitimately." Marcus felt heat rising to his face, not from embarrassment, but from a simmering anger he fought to contain. For 3 years, he'd sat in the back of classrooms like this one, keeping his head down, working twice as hard as everyone else. He'd earned that A+, fair and square. "I studied," he said simply. "I understood the material." Ms. Winters' eyebrows shot up, disappearing beneath her perfectly styled silver bangs. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh that echoed through the silent classroom. "You studied," she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "and somehow went from a C student to perfect scores overnight." "I've never been a C student in math," Marcus corrected her, his voice still calm despite the storm brewing inside him. "I had a B+ last semester, and that was only because I missed that week when my grandmother was in the hospital." Ms. Winters waved her hand dismissively. "Be that as it may, this level of work," she held up his test again, shaking it slightly for emphasis, "is simply not consistent with your capabilities." A soft murmur rippled through the classroom. Marcus felt 27 pairs of eyes on him, burning into his skin. He stood taller, squaring his shoulders. 17 years of his mother's warnings echoed in his mind. "You have to be twice as good to get half as far, and when they still try to take it from you, you hold your head high." "Ms. Winters," he said, meeting her gaze directly, "I can walk you through every problem on that test, right now, in front of everyone." For a moment she seemed taken aback by his confidence, but she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a smirk. "That won't be necessary. Memorizing answers doesn't prove understanding." "I didn't memorize anything," Marcus insisted, his patience beginning to fray. "I solved those problems step by step, just like you taught us." Ms. Winters exhaled sharply through her nose. "Mr. Johnson, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. We both know what happened here." "What exactly are you accusing me of?" Marcus asked, the question landing like a gauntlet thrown to the floor between them. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Ms. Winters replied, though her tone said otherwise. "I'm simply saying that this grade doesn't reflect your actual understanding of advanced calculus." Marcus felt something inside him snap, not in anger but in resolve. For 3 years at Westlake Academy, he'd swallowed moments like this, let them slide off his back. Not today, not anymore. "Give me a new problem," he said firmly. "Any calculus problem. Right now." Ms. Winters blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Excuse me? You think I cheated, prove it. Give me a new problem I couldn't possibly have seen before, and I'll solve it. Right here, right now." The classroom was so quiet, you could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second stretching into eternity. Several students shifted in their seats, the tension almost unbearable. In the third row, Eliza Chen, the class valedictorian, watched with wide eyes, a mixture of shock and something like admiration on her face. Ms. Winters clutched the test paper tighter, crinkling the edges. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to. Actually, I think that's an excellent idea." All heads whipped toward the classroom door. Principal Hayes stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but his presence instantly changed the dynamic in the room. "Dr. Hayes," Ms. Winters said, her voice rising half an octave, "I didn't realize you were—" "Clearly," he interrupted, stepping fully into the classroom. He looked at Marcus, then at the test paper in Ms. Winters' hand. "I couldn't help overhearing when I was passing by. Mr. Johnson has made a fair suggestion. If there's a question about his understanding of the material, a new problem should clear things up quickly." Marcus felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was far from over. Dr. Hayes wasn't taking his side, not yet. He was just enforcing fairness, which was all Marcus had asked for. Ms. Winters' face had turned a mottled red. She smoothed her blouse with one hand, visibly trying to compose herself. "Of course, if you think that's appropriate, Dr. Hayes." "I do." His tone left no room for argument. He gestured toward the whiteboard. "Please proceed." With a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, Ms. Winters turned to the board. She uncapped a marker with more force than necessary and began writing a complex integration problem that went beyond even what had been on the test. The message was clear. If Marcus wanted to prove himself, she wouldn't make it easy. Marcus watched each symbol appear on the board, his mind already breaking down the problem, identifying the approach he would need to take. He felt strangely calm now, the initial shock of the confrontation giving way to a focused determination. When Ms. Winters finished, she stepped back, a smug satisfaction on her face. "There. Find the solution to this, please." The "please" was tacked on as an afterthought, a thin veneer of politeness that fooled no one. Marcus stepped forward and took the marker from her outstretched hand. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment he saw something that surprised him. Fear. Not of him, but of being wrong, of having her assumptions challenged in front of her students and her boss. For a split second, he almost felt sorry for her. Then he remembered the humiliation of being called a cheater in front of his peers, and his resolve hardened once more. He turned to the board and began to work. The classroom disappeared around him as he sank into the familiar comfort of mathematics, the one place where there were no gray areas, no biases, only right and wrong answers that didn't care about the color of your skin or the neighborhood you came from. His hand moved confidently across the board, breaking down the integral using substitution, applying the techniques he'd practiced for countless hours at his small desk in the corner of the apartment he shared with his mother and little sister. Math had always been his escape, his superpower. When everything else felt chaotic and unfair, equations made sense. As he worked, the silence in the classroom shifted from tense to something closer to awe. Even Dr. Hayes leaned forward slightly, watching Marcus's fluid movements with undisguised interest. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No one spoke, no one interrupted. Finally, Marcus circled his answer, double-checked his work, and set the marker down. He stepped back from the board, meeting Ms. Winters' gaze evenly. "That's my solution," he said quietly. "Would you like me to explain my steps?" Ms. Winters stared at the board, her expression unreadable. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, momentarily at a loss for words. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat. "Well, Ms. Winters, is the solution correct?" She hesitated, her eyes darting between the board and Marcus. Finally, with visible reluctance, she nodded once. The answer appears to be correct. Not just the answer, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. Every step. I didn't just memorize answers for the test either. I understood the concepts, applied the techniques, and solved the problems, just like I did now. Dr. Hayes turned to Ms. Winters, an expectant look on his face. The classroom held its collective breath, waiting for what would come next. But Ms. Winters wasn't ready to concede defeat just yet. She straightened her spine, adjusting her glasses as she peered at the board once more. One correct answer doesn't necessarily... Give him another problem, called a voice from the back of the room. It was Jason Turner, the baseball team captain, who rarely spoke up in class. If you still don't believe him. Several other students nodded in agreement, a silent show of support that surprised Marcus as much as it seemed to unsettle Ms. Winters. Dr. Hayes checked his watch. We've already taken up quite a bit of class time, but I think one more problem would be definitive. Something different this time, perhaps, a differential equation. The challenge was clear. If Ms. Winters truly believed Marcus had cheated, this was her chance to prove it. If not, she needed to acknowledge her mistake and move on. Ms. Winters's face flushed a deeper shade of red as she turned back to the whiteboard. The silence in the room was deafening as she wrote out a complex differential equation, her hand slightly less steady than before. When she finished, she stepped back, the marker still clutched tightly in her hand. "Solve this," she said, her voice clipped, "and explain your methodology as you go." Marcus studied the equation for a moment, nodding slightly to himself. It was challenging, more advanced than anything they'd covered in class so far, but he recognized the form. This was the kind of problem his weekend tutor, Dr. Green, had introduced him to months ago, knowing Marcus had a hunger for knowledge that extended well beyond the standard curriculum. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the marker in Ms. Winters' hand. She relinquished it reluctantly, stepping back as if to distance herself from what was about to unfold. Marcus began to work, talking through each step as his hand moved confidently across the board. "First, I need to identify the type of differential equation we're dealing with. This is second order, non-homogeneous, with variable coefficients." His voice was clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the now captivated classroom. "For this particular form, I'll use the method of undetermined coefficients." He continued explaining, his reasoning flawless, his calculations precise. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just pure mathematical fluency that couldn't be faked or memorized. As Marcus worked, Dr. Hayes watched with growing interest, occasionally nodding in approval. Some of the students were leaning forward in their seats, genuinely engaged in a mathematical demonstration that went beyond what most of them could follow. "And finally, applying the initial conditions gives us our particular solution," Marcus concluded, circling his answer. He set the marker down and turned to face Ms. Winters and Dr. Hayes. For a long moment, no one spoke. Dr. Hayes looked at Ms. Winters expectantly, one eyebrow raised in silent question. Ms. Winters stared at the board, her lips pressed into a thin line. Even she couldn't deny the evidence before her. The solution was perfect, the methodology sound, the explanation thorough. There was no trace of memorization or cheating, only genuine understanding and exceptional ability. "Well," Dr. Hayes prompted. Ms. Winters cleared her throat. "The solution is correct," she admitted, the words clearly difficult for her to say. She didn't look at Marcus, keeping her gaze fixed on the whiteboard as if the equations held some explanation for what was happening. "And the methodology?" Dr. Hayes pressed. "Also correct," she said stiffly. "Mr. Johnson appears to have a firm grasp of the concepts." It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was an acknowledgement, however reluctant, that her accusation had been wrong. Marcus should have felt vindicated, relieved, even triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. The victory was empty when the battle should never have happened in the first place. Dr. Hayes seemed to sense this. He placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by the watching students. "Excellent work, Mr. Johnson. Truly impressive." He turned to the class. "I think we've all learned something valuable today." The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone. Dr. Hayes's gaze lingered on Ms. Winters for a moment longer before he addressed the class again. "Now, I believe you all have some learning to do that doesn't involve watching your classmate prove his exceptional abilities. Ms. Winters, could I speak with you in the hallway for a moment?" Ms. Winters nodded stiffly, avoiding Marcus's eyes as she followed Dr. Hayes toward the door. "Class, review Chapter 7 until I return," she instructed, her voice not quite steady. As the door closed behind them, the classroom erupted into a buzz of whispered conversations. Marcus returned to his seat, suddenly aware of how drained he felt. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was ebbing away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its wake. "That was incredible," said a quiet voice beside him. Marcus looked up to find Eliza Chen watching him with undisguised respect in her eyes. As the top student in their year, her academic approval meant something, even to Marcus, who had never been particularly concerned with social standing. "Thanks," he said simply, not sure what else to add. "I knew you were good at math," she continued, "but that was next level. Where did you learn to solve differential equations like that? We haven't even covered that method in class yet." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention but also not willing to minimize his achievement. "My weekend tutor. He's a math professor at the community college. He gives me extra material when I finish the regular work." Eliza nodded thoughtfully. "Well, it's obvious you deserved that A+. Ms. Winters was way out of line." Around them, other students were nodding in agreement, some even offering supportive comments. It was a strange feeling for Marcus, who had spent most of his time at Westlake on the periphery of social interactions, focusing on his studies rather than making friends with classmates who often seemed to view him with a mixture of indifference and vague suspicion. Jason Turner leaned across the aisle. "Dude, that was badass. You completely shut her down." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. He hadn't been trying to shut anyone down. He'd just been defending himself, proving what should never have been in question. Before he could formulate a reply, the classroom door opened again, and Ms. Winters returned alone. Her face was composed, but there was a tightness around her eyes that suggested the conversation with Dr. Hayes had not been pleasant. She walked to her desk and placed her hands flat on its surface, as if needing the support. When she looked up, her gaze found Marcus, and for the first time that day, she truly saw him. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice carrying in the suddenly quiet room, "I owe you an apology." The classroom went still, all whispered conversations instantly ceasing. This was unprecedented. Ms. Winters didn't apologize to anyone, ever. "My accusation was unfounded and inappropriate," she continued, the words coming out with the stiffness of someone reading from an invisible script. "Your work on the exam was exemplary, and you deserve both the grade and recognition for your achievement, not suspicion." Marcus held her gaze steadily, neither accepting nor rejecting the apology yet. Part of him wanted to simply nod and let it go, to return to the comfortable anonymity of being just another student. But another part, the part that had stood up today instead of shrinking back, knew this moment mattered not just for him, but for others who might come after him. "Why did you assume I cheated?" he asked, his voice quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Was it because I got a perfect score, or was it because of who you think I am?" A hush fell over the room, the question hanging in the air like a live wire. Ms. Winter's composure faltered for a moment, the carefully constructed facade cracking to reveal a flash of something raw and uncomfortable. "That's not," she began, then stopped herself. She took a deep breath. "Dr. Hayes suggested I reflect on whether my assumptions about students might be influenced by factors other than their academic performance." It wasn't a direct answer, but it was as close to one as Marcus expected to get. He nodded once, accepting what was offered while acknowledging its limitations. "I accept your apology," he said finally, "and I hope we can move forward with a better understanding." Relief flashed across Ms. Winters's face, though whether it was from his acceptance or the sense that a potentially career-damaging situation had been diffused, Marcus couldn't tell. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," she said, inclining her head slightly. She turned to address the entire class. "Now let's return to our lesson. We were discussing the applications of derivatives in optimization problems. As Ms. Winters resumed teaching, her voice more subdued than usual, Marcus felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Carefully shielding the screen from view, he checked the message. It was from his mother. "Just got a call from Dr. Hayes. So proud of you for standing up for yourself. We'll talk tonight. Love you." A small smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's lips. His mother had always been his strongest advocate, teaching him to navigate a world that sometimes seemed determined to underestimate him. "Never let them make you doubt yourself," she'd told him countless times. "Your mind is powerful, your spirit is strong, and your potential is limitless." Today, he had lived those words. The rest of the class passed in a blur, with Ms. Winters studiously avoiding calling on Marcus despite his raised hand for several questions. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of the period, students gathered their belongings and filed out, many of them giving Marcus approving nods or words of support as they passed. "Johnson," called a voice as Marcus was about to exit. He turned to find Ms. Winters still at her desk, her expression unreadable. "A moment, please." Marcus hesitated, then stepped back into the classroom, letting the door close behind him. He approached her desk cautiously, unsure what to expect. Ms. Winters looked up at him, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating the fine lines around her eyes, the strands of silver in her hair. For the first time, Marcus saw not just the stern teacher, but the human being beneath, flawed, complex, perhaps even capable of growth. "Your solution to that differential equation," she said, her voice quieter now that they were alone. "That wasn't just good, that was exceptional, university-level work." Marcus nodded, accepting the compliment without either pride or false modesty. "Thank you." She seemed to be wrestling with something, her fingers idly straightening papers that were already perfectly aligned. Finally, she looked up again. "I've been teaching for almost 20 years, Mr. Johnson. I've had thousands of students pass through my classroom. Very few have had your natural aptitude for mathematics." It was as close as she would come to admitting that her perception of him had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. Marcus understood this, and also understood that acknowledgement didn't necessarily mean change, not yet, but it was a start. "I appreciate you saying that," he said carefully. "I work hard at it." "Yes," she said, a hint of new respect in her voice. "I see that now." She hesitated, then added, "Dr. Hayes mentioned you've been working with a tutor from the community college." Marcus nodded. "Dr. Green. He's been helping me on Saturdays for about a year now." "I see." Ms. Winters hesitated, then reached for a folder on her desk. "I don't often do this, but I think in your case." She pulled out a brochure and held it out to him. "This is for the Summer Mathematics Institute at Stanford. It's highly competitive. Only 20 high school students nationwide are selected each year. The application deadline is next month." Marcus took the brochure, genuine surprise flickering across his face. The Summer Mathematics Institute was legendary among math enthusiasts, an intensive 6-week program where talented high schoolers worked alongside some of the world's leading mathematicians. Getting in was like winning the academic lottery. "I've been asked to nominate candidates in the past," Ms. Winters continued, "but I've never found a student I felt was truly qualified." Her gaze met his directly. "I'd like to nominate you, Mr. Johnson, if you're interested." Marcus stared at the brochure, momentarily speechless. This was an opportunity beyond anything he'd imagined possible, a door opening to a world he'd only dreamed about. Yes, he managed finally. "I'd be very interested. Thank you." Ms. Winters nodded, a hint of something like satisfaction in her expression. "You'll need to submit a personal statement along with my recommendation, and there's a challenging set of problem-solving tasks that are part of the application. Dr. Green could probably help you prepare." "I'll start working on it this weekend," Marcus said, carefully placing the brochure in his backpack. "Good." Ms. Winters paused, then added, "Your performance today, it made me realize I may have misjudged other students over the years. That's not a comfortable thought." It was the closest thing to a genuine apology he was likely to get, an acknowledgement not just of today's error, but of a pattern that might have affected others before him. Marcus recognized the significance of the admission, even as he wondered how many other talented students had been overlooked or underestimated because they didn't fit a preconceived notion of what academic excellence looked like. "Thank you for telling me that," he said simply. She nodded once, a dismissal and an acknowledgement rolled into one. "You'd better get to your next class. I'll email you the details about the application process this evening." As Marcus left the classroom, the brochure safely tucked away in his backpack, he felt something shift inside him, a recalibration of possibilities. The day that had begun with public humiliation had somehow transformed into one that might alter the course of his future. The hallway was nearly empty, most students already in their next classes. Marcus checked his watch. He was almost 10 minutes late for world history. Mr. Leibowitz wasn't strict about tardiness, but Marcus hated not being punctual. He quickened his pace, his mind still processing everything that had happened. He was so lost in thought that he almost ran straight into Dr. Hayes, who was emerging from the administrative office. "Ah, Mr. Johnson," the principal said, not seeming surprised to see him in the hallway during class time. "I was just coming to find you. Do you have a moment?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, though he wasn't sure how much more emotional bandwidth he had for serious conversations today. Dr. Hayes gestured toward his office. "Just a quick chat, I promise. I've already let Mr. Leibowitz know you'll be a bit late." Marcus followed him into the spacious office, taking a seat in one of the comfortable chairs facing the principal's desk. He'd only been in this room once before, during his first week at Westlake, when Dr. Hayes had personally welcomed the scholarship students and assured them they were valued members of the school community. The memory of that talk felt different now, in light of today's events. Dr. Hayes settled into his chair with a sigh, running a hand over his closely cropped gray hair. "First, let me say how impressed I was with how you handled yourself today. Not just your mathematical abilities, which are clearly exceptional, but your composure and dignity in a difficult situation." "Thank you, sir," Marcus said, unsure where this was going. "I've spoken at length with Ms. Winters," Dr. Hayes continued, his expression serious. "She understands the gravity of what happened. Her conduct was unacceptable, and there will be consequences." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want to get anyone in trouble." Dr. Hayes's expression softened slightly. "That's commendable, Marcus. But this isn't just about you. It's about ensuring that every student at Westlake is treated with respect and fairness. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Can I ask you something directly?" Marcus nodded cautiously. "Was this the first time you've experienced this kind of assumption from a teacher here?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus hesitated, weighing his words carefully. He thought about the countless small moments over the past 3 years, the subtle dismissals, the lowered expectations, the surprised reactions when he excelled. None as blatant as today, but all part of the same underlying pattern. "No," he said finally. "Not the first time." Dr. Hayes nodded slowly, as if Marcus had confirmed something he already suspected. "I was afraid of that." He sighed, a deep, weary sound. Westlake prides itself on being a progressive institution. We have diversity initiatives, inclusion programs, scholarships specifically designed to bring in talented students from all backgrounds. He gestured vaguely around him, encompassing the school beyond the office walls. But programs and policies aren't enough if the culture doesn't change with them. Marcus remained silent, sensing that Dr. Hayes needed to say these things as much for himself as for anyone else. "I've been principal here for 8 years, Dr. Hayes continued, "and I've worked hard to make this a place where every student can thrive, but clearly I've missed something important if incidents like today are still happening." He fixed Marcus with a direct gaze. "I need your help, Marcus." "My help?" Marcus echoed, genuinely surprised. "Yes, I'm forming a student-faculty committee to address these issues more directly, to look at the experiences of students from underrepresented backgrounds and develop actionable strategies for creating a truly inclusive environment. Given what I saw today, I can't think of a better student to help lead this initiative than you." Marcus blinked, momentarily taken aback by the request. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to decide right now," Dr. Hayes assured him. "Think about it. Talk it over with your mother. But I believe you could make a real difference here, not just for yourself, but for students who will come after you." The weight of the principal's words settled around Marcus's shoulders. Not a burden exactly, but a responsibility he hadn't anticipated when he woke up this morning. Part of him wanted to decline, to focus on his studies and his newly possible dream of the Stanford program. But another part, the part that had stood up to Ms. Winters, that had refused to back down when facing injustice, recognized the importance of what Dr. Hayes was proposing. "I'll think about it," he promised. "But regardless of what I decide, I'm glad you're taking this seriously." "More than seriously," Dr. Hayes said, his expression grave. "What happened today was a wake-up call for me as much as for Ms. Winters. Change is overdue, and it's going to start happening immediately." He stood up, signaling that their conversation was drawing to a close. "I've taken enough of your time for now. Mr. Leibowitz is expecting you." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a hall pass, quickly signing it. "And Marcus, thank you for your honesty." Marcus took the pass, nodding his acknowledgement. As he left the principal's office and headed toward his history class, his mind was swirling with everything that had transpired in the last few hours. The confrontation with Ms. Winters, the unexpected support from his classmates, the Stanford opportunity, and now Dr. Hayes's committee. It was almost too much to process. By the time he slipped quietly into Mr. Leibowitz's classroom, offering the hall pass with a murmured apology for his lateness, the initial shock had begun to fade, replaced by a strange blend of exhaustion and exhilaration. He took his usual seat near the back of the room, pulling out his history textbook and notebook, trying to focus on the lecture already in progress. But concentration proved elusive. His thoughts kept drifting back to the brochure in his backpack, to the conversation with Dr. Hayes, to the moment when he'd stood at the whiteboard and proven not just his mathematical abilities, but his right to be taken seriously. He was so lost in reflection that he almost missed Mr. Leibowitz calling his name. "Marcus, Would you care to share your thoughts on Roosevelt's approach to trust busting? The history teacher's kind eyes suggested he knew Marcus hadn't been following the discussion, but was offering him a chance to engage nonetheless. Marcus began, then stopped, realizing he had no idea what specific aspect of Roosevelt's policies they were discussing. A few weeks ago, he might have mumbled an apology and admitted he hadn't been paying attention. But something had changed today, some fundamental shift in how he saw himself in relation to this school and its expectations. "Actually, Mr. Leibowitz, I missed the first part of the discussion," he said, his voice clear and unapologetic. "Could you repeat the question so I can respond thoughtfully?" A flicker of surprise crossed the teacher's face, quickly replaced by what looked like approval. "Of course, Marcus. We were discussing Theodore Roosevelt's approach to regulating big business, specifically whether his trust-busting policies were motivated more by economic concerns or by his philosophy about the proper balance of power in a democracy." Now that he understood the question, Marcus's mind quickly organized what he knew about the topic. He'd written a paper on this very subject last semester. "I think it was both," he began, his confidence growing with each word. Roosevelt was pragmatic about economics, but he was also deeply committed to the idea that too much power in too few hands was dangerous for democracy. His trust-busting wasn't just about fair markets, it was about ensuring that economic power didn't translate into unchecked political influence. Mr. Leibowitz nodded encouragingly. "An excellent point. And how would you relate that to his personal background as a member of the elite himself?" For the next few minutes, Marcus found himself fully engaged in the discussion, offering insights that drew appreciative nods from both the teacher and his classmates. It wasn't the first time he'd participated in class, but it was perhaps the first time he'd done so without that small voice in the back of his mind, whispering that he needed to be careful, to not stand out too much, to not challenge the unspoken boundaries that had always seemed to exist for students like him. When the final bell rang at 3:15, Marcus stepped out of the school building into the warm spring afternoon, feeling as though he'd lived through an entire week rather than a single day. The usual after-school chaos swirled around him, students rushing to sports practices, climbing into waiting cars, or gathering in clusters to make weekend plans. But today, there was a difference. People noticed him. It wasn't just the occasional nod or hey from someone who recognized him from a shared class. Today, students he barely knew made eye contact, offered small smiles or words of acknowledgement. The story had spread throughout the school with the lightning speed that only high school gossip can achieve. "There he is," he heard someone whisper as he passed a group of sophomores. "The guy who schooled Ms. Winters in her own classroom." Marcus kept his expression neutral, neither acknowledging the comment nor speeding up to escape it. Part of him wanted to correct the narrative. He hadn't schooled anyone. He'd simply defended himself. But another part recognized that this version of events, however exaggerated, was changing how people saw him. For better or worse, the quiet, studious Marcus Johnson, who had navigated Westlake's hallways with minimal notice for 3 years, had suddenly become visible. He spotted Eliza Chen waiting by the bike racks, clearly looking for someone. When she saw him, she waved him over. "Hey," she said as he approached. "Crazy day, huh?" Marcus nodded, adjusting the straps of his backpack. "That's one way to put it." "So I heard Ms. Winters gave you information about the Stanford program," Eliza said, her tone casual but her eyes intent. "Are you going to apply?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "How did you know about that?" Eliza shrugged. "My brother was nominated last year. He didn't get in, only 20 spots nationwide, right? But Ms. Winters made a big deal about nominating him. First student from Westlake she ever thought was worthy, according to her." She tilted her head slightly. "Until you, apparently." There was no resentment in her voice, just a matter-of-fact observation. that nevertheless made Marcus feel a strange mix of pride and discomfort. He hadn't known about Eliza's brother, had never even considered that Ms. Winters might have nominated anyone before him. "Yeah, I'm going to apply," he said. "Not sure if I have a shot, but it seems like an amazing opportunity." "You definitely have a shot," Eliza replied with surprising conviction. "Especially after today. My brother's good at math, but he's not solve a new differential equation on the spot good." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her usually serious face. "Anyway, I just wanted to say good luck. And if you need any help with the application, my brother still has all his materials. I could ask him to share them with you." "That would be great, thanks," Marcus said, touched by the unexpected offer. Eliza nodded, then glanced at her watch. "I should go. Debate team practice. See you tomorrow?" "Yeah, see you tomorrow." As she walked away, Marcus found himself reevaluating yet another aspect of his school experience. He and Eliza had been in the same advanced classes for years, occasional partners for lab work or group projects, but never real friends. Had that been her choice or his? Or just the invisible barriers that seemed to naturally form in high school, separating students into their assigned social categories? Shaking off the thought, Marcus made his way to the bus stop. Unlike many Westlake students, he didn't have a car waiting for him in the student parking lot or a parent scheduled to pick him up. The public bus would take him within a few blocks of the apartment complex where he lived with his mother and little sister, the same route he'd taken nearly every day since freshman year. As he waited at the stop, his phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Picking up Zoe from her playdate. "Can you start dinner? Chicken's defrosting in the fridge." He texted back a quick affirmative, smiling slightly at the normalcy of the request. His mother had no way of knowing how much had happened since their brief exchange earlier. That conversation would have to wait until she got home. The bus ride gave Marcus time to decompress, to let the events of the day settle in his mind as he stared out the window at the familiar streets passing by. The route took him from the manicured lawns and stately homes surrounding Westlake Academy through progressively less affluent neighborhoods, a physical manifestation of the social distance he traversed each day. When he got off at his stop and walked the 3 blocks to their apartment building, he felt the last of the day's tension begin to ease from his shoulders. This was his territory, the busy street corner where Mr. Wallace sold the best tamales in the city from his food cart, the small park where he'd taught Zoe to ride a bike last summer, the convenience store where Mrs. Kim always slipped an extra candy into the bag when he stopped by for his sister. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a well-maintained but modest building. Marcus unlocked the door and stepped inside, dropping his backpack on the chair by the entrance. The apartment was small but homey, filled with carefully chosen furniture and family photos. His mother had a gift for making spaces feel warm and welcoming, even on a limited budget. He went straight to the kitchen, pulling the chicken from the refrigerator and setting it on the counter while he searched the pantry for rice and vegetables. Cooking was something he'd learned out of necessity. With his mother often working late shifts at the hospital where she was a nurse, Marcus had taken on many household responsibilities, especially after Zoe was born. As he chopped onions and bell peppers, his mind returned to the Stanford brochure in his backpack. The Summer Mathematics Institute wasn't just prestigious, it was expensive. Even with a scholarship, there would be travel costs, supplies, appropriate clothing, money that they didn't have to spare. But even as the practical concerns surfaced, Marcus knew his mother would find a way. She always did when it came to educational opportunities. "An investment in your mind is the one thing no one can ever take from you," she often told him. It was the philosophy that had led her to work extra shifts to pay for his weekend math tutor, to research scholarship opportunities for Westlake, to spend hours helping him prepare for entrance exams when she was exhausted from her own work. The sound of keys in the lock pulled him from his thoughts. The front door swung open, and 8-year-old Zoe burst in, her braids adorned with colorful beads that clicked together as she moved. "Marcus!" she exclaimed, dropping her backpack and rushing toward him. "Guess what? I got 100 on my spelling test, and Mrs. Parker said my story was the best in the class, and Lily invited me to her birthday party at the trampoline park." Marcus grinned, setting down his knife to give his sister a proper hug. "That's awesome, Zoe. Sounds like you had a pretty great day." "The best day," she agreed solemnly before peering at the cutting board. "Are we having stir-fry? Can I help?" "You can set the table," he offered, knowing that at 8, her enthusiasm for cooking still outpaced her skills. Their mother, Denise Johnson, entered more slowly, setting down her purse and nursing bag with a sigh of relief. Despite the evident fatigue in her posture, her face lit up at the sight of her children. "There are my favorite people," she said, crossing the small living room to kiss Marcus on the cheek and ruffle Zoe's hair. "Something smells good." "It's not ready yet," Marcus said, "but it will be by the time you've had a chance to change." Denise smiled gratefully. "You're a lifesaver." She glanced at the kitchen counter, noting the meal prep in progress. "Chicken stir-fry?" Marcus nodded. "With extra bell peppers, just how you like it." "Perfect." She squeezed his shoulder affectionately before heading toward her bedroom. "I'll be right back." As Zoe bustled around setting the table, a task she approached with the seriousness of a royal dinner preparation, Marcus continued cooking, the familiar rhythm of the activity grounding him after the day's emotional turbulence. When their mother returned, dressed in comfortable clothes with her hair freed from its workday bun, they sat down to eat together, a daily ritual they maintained regardless of schedules or exhaustion. "So," Denise said as they began serving themselves, "I got an interesting call from Dr. Hayes today." Her tone was casual, but her eyes were intent on Marcus's face. "He said there was an incident in your calculus class, something about you proving your teacher wrong in front of everyone." Zoe's eyes widened. "You did? That's so cool. Did you get in trouble?" "No, Squirt, I didn't get in trouble," Marcus assured her, then turned to his mother. "It's a long story." "We've got time," Denise said, settling back in her chair. "Dr. Hayes gave me the highlights, but I'd like to hear it from you." So Marcus told them, laying out the events of the day while their dinner slowly cooled on their plates. He didn't dramatize or minimize, but simply recounted what had happened. Ms. Winters's accusation, his defense, Dr. Hayes's intervention, and everything that followed. Denise listened without interrupting, though her expression shifted from concern to anger to pride as the story unfolded. Zoe, who idolized her big brother, gasped at all the right moments, her young face indignant at the thought of anyone doubting his abilities. "And then Ms. Winters gave me this," Marcus concluded, reaching for his backpack and pulling out the Stanford brochure. He handed it to his mother. "She wants to nominate me for the program. It's a really big deal." Denise examined the glossy pamphlet, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the details. "The Summer Mathematics Institute," she murmured. "Marcus, this is incredible." "It's super competitive," Marcus explained, trying to keep his own excitement in check. "Only 20 students get in each year, from all over the country." "And Ms. Winters, the same teacher who accused you of cheating, wants to nominate you?" Denise asked, her tone making it clear she hadn't missed the irony. Marcus nodded. "I know it sounds weird, but I think today was actually a wake-up call for her." She admitted she's never had a student she thought was qualified before. He hesitated, then added, "Well, that's not entirely true. Apparently she nominated Eliza Chen's brother last year, but he didn't get in." Denise studied the brochure more carefully, flipping through the pages to examine the details. 6 weeks at Stanford working with professional mathematicians. Her eyes found the section on costs, and Marcus saw her expression flicker briefly before she looked up with a smile. This is exactly the kind of opportunity you deserve, baby. If I get in, Marcus reminded her, not wanting to get ahead of himself. It's a long shot. You'll get in, Zoe declared with the absolute certainty only an 8-year-old could muster. You're the smartest person in the whole world. Marcus laughed, reaching over to tug one of her braids affectionately. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Squirt. Zoe's right, Denise said, her voice quiet but firm. Don't sell yourself short, Marcus. What you did today, standing up for yourself, proving your abilities in front of everyone, that took not just intelligence but courage. And that combination, that's rarer than you think. Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more closely. His mother had always been his biggest supporter. But there was something different in her eyes tonight, a fierce pride mingled with something like vindication. Dr. Hayes also asked me to help with a new committee, he said, picking up his fork and taking a bite of the now lukewarm stir-fry. About making the school more inclusive, addressing bias, that kind of thing. Denise raised an eyebrow. And how do you feel about that? Marcus shrugged, chewing thoughtfully. I'm not sure yet. Part of me thinks it's important work, especially after today, but another part feels like it shouldn't be your responsibility to fix their problems, Denise suggested. Yeah, exactly. He pushed his rice around on his plate. I mean, I'm already juggling a lot with school and helping around here. And if I'm going to apply for this Stanford program, that's going to take time too. Denise nodded, understanding in her eyes. You don't have to decide tonight. Just remember that whatever you choose, I'm behind you 100%. They finished dinner, the conversation shifting to Zoe's day and the upcoming trampoline park birthday party, which would require some budget adjustments, but was deemed worth it for the joy it would bring her. After helping clean up, Marcus retreated to his room, the smallest bedroom in the apartment, but still his sanctuary. The walls were adorned with posters of famous mathematicians and scientists, interspersed with a few photos of his family and the academic awards he'd accumulated over the years. His desk occupied most of the available space, a second-hand piece that his mother had refinished and presented to him on his 14th birthday. He sat down and pulled out his phone, surprised to see a series of notifications. Text messages from classmates he rarely talked to, congratulating him on standing up to Winters, friend requests on social media from people who had never acknowledged him before, even a direct message from Jason Turner asking if he'd be willing to tutor him in calculus. The sudden attention was surreal. For 3 years, he'd existed on the periphery of Westlake's social scene, neither actively excluded nor fully welcomed. Now, in the span of a single day, the landscape had shifted beneath his feet. He set the phone aside and pulled out the Stanford brochure again, reading it more carefully this time. The program sounded even more impressive upon closer inspection. Participants would attend lectures by renowned mathematicians, work on original research projects, and have access to resources most high school students could only dream about. The application process was rigorous. A personal statement, letters of recommendation, academic transcripts, and a set of challenging mathematical problems that had to be solved and submitted with detailed explanations. As Marcus read through the requirements, the initial intimidation he'd felt began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of determination. He could do this. Whether he got in or not was beyond his control, but he would give the application everything he had. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting his mother. Instead, it was Zoe who poked her head in, already in her pajamas, her braids now gathered in a protective nighttime wrap. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Of course." Marcus gestured for her to come in. "What's up?" Zoe entered, closing the door carefully behind her. She climbed onto his bed, crossing her legs and looking at him with serious eyes. That teacher who thought you cheated, was it because you're black? The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He had known this conversation would come someday, but he hadn't expected it today or from Zoe. He looked at his little sister, so young, so innocent in many ways, yet already perceptive enough to recognize the undercurrents of what had happened. I think that was part of it, he answered honestly after a moment's consideration. Not all of it, but part of it. Zoe nodded as if he had confirmed something she already suspected. Layla says her brother gets in trouble at school all the time, even when white kids are doing the same things and don't get in trouble. Layla was her best friend, whose older brother attended the public high school down the road. That happens sometimes, Marcus acknowledged, choosing his words carefully. Some people have ideas about who we are before they even know us, and those ideas can make them treat us unfairly. Is that why Mom made me go to that special program for smart kids, so people won't think I'm not smart just because I'm black? Marcus felt a twinge in his chest. 8 years old, and already she was piecing these things together. Mom wants you to have all the opportunities you deserve, he said. The program is good for you because you are smart, not just because of what other people might think. Zoe seemed to consider this, absently playing with the edge of his bedspread. But what you did today, proving that teacher wrong, that was important, right? Not just for you? Marcus felt a surge of emotion, pride in his sister's perception, sadness that she needed to understand these complexities so young, determination that her path would be easier than his. Yes, he said softly. It was important. Because sometimes when you stand up for yourself, you're standing up for other people too. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Then, with the rapid emotional pivots of childhood, her solemn expression gave way to a grin. I told Layla my brother is a math genius who made his teacher apologize in front of the whole class. She said I was making it up, but I told her it's totally true. Marcus laughed, relieved by the shift in mood. Well, I wouldn't say genius. I would, Zoe declared, hopping off the bed. Night, Marcus. Night, Squirt, sweet dreams. After she left, Marcus sat for a long time thinking about their conversation. What had happened today wasn't just about him, or even just about Ms. Winters. It was about patterns and expectations, about invisible barriers and the courage it took to challenge them. And now, somehow, he had become a symbol of that challenge, not just to his classmates, but to his little sister as well. The weight of that responsibility settled around his shoulders as he finally turned to his homework, pushing aside thoughts of Stanford and committees and social dynamics to focus on the familiar comfort of equations and formulas. The next morning, Marcus arrived at school earlier than usual, hoping to avoid the attention he'd received yesterday. But as soon as he stepped through Westlake's imposing front entrance, he could feel the difference. Students glanced his way, nudged their friends, whispered behind hands. Not malicious exactly, but definitely aware of his presence in a way they hadn't been before. He kept his head up, moving purposefully toward his locker. As he entered the combination, he heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Eliza Chen coming his way, a folder in hand. "Morning," she said briskly. "I talked to my brother last night about the Stanford program. He said to give you his application materials from last year, including the practice problems they sent him. He thought they might help." Marcus took the folder, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Thank you, that's really generous of him." Eliza shrugged, but there was a hint of a smile on her normally serious face. "He said to tell you he's rooting for you. We both are." She glanced at her watch. "I've got to run. Student council meeting before first period. See you in calculus?" "Yeah, see you there," Marcus replied, watching as she strode purposefully down the hallway, already focused on her next task. He opened the folder and glanced through its contents, Application forms, problem sets, notes written in neat handwriting, even a draft of a personal statement with comments in the margins. It was a treasure trove of insider information, the kind of advantage that could make a real difference in a competitive process like this. Just as he was about to close his locker, his phone vibrated with a text message from Dr. Green, his weekend math tutor. "Heard about what happened yesterday. Proud of you. Let's talk about it at our session on Saturday." Marcus smiled slightly, wondering how the news had reached Dr. Green so quickly. Probably through the grapevine of academic connections that seemed to link all the math and science teachers in the area. He sent back a quick, "Thanks, see you then," before heading to his first class of the day. The morning passed in a blur of lectures, note-taking, and the occasional curious glance from classmates. By lunchtime, Marcus was starting to adjust to his new visibility, though he still felt a flutter of nervousness as he walked into the cafeteria. The Westlake lunchroom was an unintentional map of the school's social hierarchy. Athletes and popular kids claimed the tables in the center, while the periphery was divided among various interest groups and social strata. Marcus typically ate with a small group of other scholarship students, a mixed bunch united more by their outsider status than by common interests. Today, however, as he made his way toward their usual table, tray in hand, he was intercepted by Jason Turner. "Johnson," Jason called, gesturing him over to the athletes' table. "Come sit with us." Marcus hesitated, caught off guard by the invitation. The athletes' table had always been off-limits to someone like him, not through any explicit rule, but through the unspoken codes that governed high school social interactions. He glanced toward his regular table, where his friends were watching the exchange with varying degrees of surprise and suspicion. Then back at Jason, who was still waiting expectantly, surrounded by his teammates. "Thanks," Marcus said finally, "but I usually sit over there." He nodded toward his friends. Jason seemed momentarily stunned by the refusal, as if the concept of someone declining his invitation was entirely foreign to him. Then his expression shifted to something like grudging respect. "Cool, man, but the offer stands. And I was serious about the tutoring thing." He flashed a grin. "I'm barely keeping a C in calculus, and coach says I need at least a B to stay team captain." "I'll think about it," Marcus replied, meaning it. Tutoring could be a good source of income, and he was already helping his fellow scholarship students informally. As he continued toward his regular table, he could feel the eyes of half the cafeteria following him, evaluating this small interaction and its implications for the social landscape. The thought almost made him laugh. 24 hours ago, no one would have noticed or cared where he sat or who he talked to. "What was that about?" asked Dina, one of his usual lunch companions, as he took his seat. Marcus shrugged. "Jason wants calculus tutoring." "Yeah, right," snorted Michael, another scholarship student. "More like he wants to be associated with the guy who took down the wicked witch of the math department." "I didn't take down anybody," Marcus said, uncomfortable with the characterization. "I just stood up for myself." "Which is practically a revolutionary act at this place," Dina said, waving her fork for emphasis. "Do you know how many times I've heard teachers talking down to scholarship kids like we should be grateful just to breathe the same air as the full payers, like we're charity cases instead of students who earned our spots?" Marcus nodded because he did know, all too well. "Maybe things will change now," he said. "Dr. Hayes seems serious about addressing some of these issues." "We'll see," Michael said skeptically. "Committees and task forces are how administrations pretend to care without actually changing anything." Speaking of which, Dina leaned forward, curiosity in her eyes. "Is it true Hayes asked you to be on some new diversity committee?" News really did travel fast at Westlake. "Yeah, but I haven't decided yet if I'm going to do it." "You should," Dina said immediately. "They need to hear from people who actually experience this stuff, not just administrators patting themselves on the back for having a few brown faces in their brochures." Maybe, Marcus conceded. But I've got a lot going on right now. Like what? Michael asked around a mouthful of cafeteria pizza. Marcus hesitated, then decided there was no reason to keep it secret. Ms. Winters is nominating me for the Summer Mathematics Institute at Stanford. His friends' reactions were immediate and enthusiastic. Dina squealed and hugged him sideways, nearly causing him to spill his drink. Michael let out a low whistle of appreciation. Dude, that's huge. My cousin applied for that last year. Said it was harder to get into than Harvard. It's just a nomination, Marcus reminded them. I still have to get through the application process, and there are only 20 spots nationwide. You'll get in, Dina said confidently, echoing Zoe's certainty from the night before. You're literally the smartest person I know. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Marcus said, feeling a warm glow of gratitude for his friend's unwavering support. Unlike the sudden attention from the popular crowd, this felt genuine, grounded in real knowledge of who he was. The conversation shifted to other topics: Michael's latest robotics project, Dina's struggle with her English paper, the upcoming spring dance that none of them were particularly excited about. For a few minutes, it felt like any other day, the drama of yesterday temporarily set aside. But as lunch period drew to a close, Marcus felt a flutter of apprehension. Next was calculus with Ms. Winters, and despite yesterday's resolution, he wasn't sure what to expect. Would she revert to her previous dismissive attitude? Would the other students treat the class differently? Would she call on him more or less? He entered the classroom with cautious optimism, taking his usual seat near the middle of the room. Other students trickled in, some giving him nods or small smiles of acknowledgement. Eliza Chen slid into the desk beside him, not her usual spot, and gave him a reassuring nod. "Ready for round 2?" she whispered, a hint of humor in her voice. "As I'll ever be," he replied, finding himself grateful for her unexpected alliance. When Ms. Winters entered the room, the usual chatter died down immediately. She looked different today, still professionally dressed and meticulously groomed, but there was a subtle change in her demeanor, a slight softening around the edges. "Good afternoon," she said, placing her materials on the desk with precise movements. Her eyes scanned the room, briefly meeting Marcus's gaze before moving on. "Before we begin today's lesson, I have an announcement." The class shifted attentively, perhaps sensing that this was not a routine notification about homework or quizzes. "Yesterday," Ms. Winters continued, her voice carefully controlled, "an incident occurred in this classroom that I'm not proud of. I made assumptions about a student's work that were unfounded and unfair." She paused, and for a moment Marcus thought she might actually single him out again, this time for a public apology. Instead, she continued more generally, "It's been brought to my attention that this is not an isolated issue, either in my teaching or in our school community as a whole. As educators, we have a responsibility to recognize and address our biases, to ensure that every student is evaluated fairly based on their actual performance, not on our preconceptions." A hushed silence had fallen over the classroom. This level of self-reflection from Ms. Winters was unprecedented, and everyone seemed to recognize the significance of the moment. "To that end," she went on, "I've been working with Dr. Hayes to develop some changes to our assessment practices." She picked up a stack of papers from her desk. "Starting today, all tests and major assignments in this class will use a blind grading system. You'll each have a numerical code instead of writing your name on your work. This should help ensure that my evaluation of your mathematical abilities is not influenced by other factors." She began distributing the papers, which contained details about the new system. As one landed on Marcus's desk, he felt a complex mixture of emotions: validation that his experience had been acknowledged, satisfaction that real changes were being implemented, but also a lingering sadness that such measures were necessary at all. Beside him, Eliza leaned over slightly. "This is because of you," she whispered. "I've never seen her admit she was wrong about anything, let alone change her policies." Marcus nodded, still processing the implications. Yesterday's confrontation hadn't just been about clearing his name or proving his abilities. It had sparked something larger, a small but significant shift in the institutional practices that shaped their education. As Ms. Winters began the day's lesson on applications of integration, her teaching style seemed subtly different as well. She called on students more evenly, took more time with questions, and made a visible effort to acknowledge good work from everyone, not just her perceived favorites. When Saturday morning arrived, Marcus was already awake and dressed by 7, reviewing the Stanford application materials Eliza's brother had shared with him. The sample problems were as challenging as he'd expected, requiring not just computational skills but creative thinking and elegant problem-solving approaches. He'd already started working through them, filling a notebook with calculations and ideas. At 9 o'clock, he gathered his materials and headed out for his weekly session with Dr. Green. The community college was a 30-minute bus ride from his apartment, but Marcus never minded the journey. It gave him time to think, to prepare mentally for the intellectual challenges that awaited him. Dr. Oliver Green wasn't what most people pictured when they thought of a mathematics professor. In his mid-50s, with dreadlocks streaked with gray and a penchant for vintage band t-shirts, he looked more like an aging rock musician than an academic with multiple PhDs. But his brilliance was undeniable, and his passion for nurturing young mathematical minds was what had led him to start the weekend tutoring program that had become Marcus's lifeline. "There he is," Dr. Green called as Marcus entered the small classroom where they usually met. Unlike most weeks, the room wasn't empty. A woman in a tailored suit was sitting across from Dr. Green, both of them surrounded by papers and laptops. "Sorry, am I early?" Marcus asked, hesitating at the door. "Right on time," Dr. Green assured him, rising to his feet with a warm smile. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet Dr. Eleanor Choi, chair of the mathematics department at Stanford and director of the Summer Mathematics Institute." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat as the woman turned to face him, her expression friendly but evaluating. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Marcus," Dr. Choi said, extending her hand. "Oliver has been telling me about you for years, but after hearing about what happened at your school this week, I decided it was time we met in person." Marcus shook her hand, trying to process what was happening. He glanced at Dr. Green, who was watching the exchange with undisguised delight. "Don't look so surprised," Dr. Green said with a chuckle. "Eleanor and I were graduate students together at MIT. We've stayed in touch. Oliver has been recommending you for our program since you were a freshman," Dr. Choi explained, gesturing for Marcus to take a seat. "But our selection process typically relies heavily on teacher nominations and, well, let's just say none were forthcoming from your school until now." The implications of her statement sank in slowly. Dr. Green had believed in him for years, had tried to create opportunities for him that had been blocked by the same biases he'd confronted with Ms. Winters. "The confrontation in your calculus class has created quite a buzz in academic circles," Dr. Choi continued. "It's rare for these systemic issues to be exposed so dramatically, with such clear evidence of exceptional ability being overlooked due to preconceptions." Marcus felt a mixture of embarrassment and pride at her words. "I wasn't trying to make a statement," he said. "I just wanted to be judged fairly." "Which is exactly what every student deserves," Dr. Choi nodded. "Yet too often, that simple justice is denied, especially to students from underrepresented backgrounds." She picked up a folder from the table, identical to the one Ms. Winters had given him, and handed it over. "I'd like to personally invite you to apply to the Summer Mathematics Institute. Your application will receive full consideration on its merits, and based on what I've heard from Oliver and others, I suspect those merits are substantial." Marcus accepted the folder, a surreal feeling washing over him. This was more than just an opportunity to apply. It was a personal endorsement from the program director herself. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling inadequate for the moment. "I'm already working on the application. The problems are challenging, but not beyond your capabilities," Dr. Green finished for him, his pride evident. "Show her what you've been working on, Marcus." For the next hour, the three of them sat together, reviewing Marcus's preliminary work on the application problems. Dr. Choi asked probing questions, suggested alternative approaches, and offered insights that made even Dr. Green nod in appreciation. It wasn't an evaluation so much as a glimpse of what the institute itself would be like, a collaborative exploration of mathematical concepts with minds that could truly challenge and nurture his own. As their impromptu session drew to a close, Dr. Choi gathered her materials. "I look forward to receiving your completed application, Marcus," she said, "and regardless of the outcome, I hope you'll consider Stanford for your undergraduate studies. We need more minds like yours in our program." After she left, Marcus turned to Dr. Green, still processing everything that had just happened. "Did you arrange that?" he asked. Dr. Green's expression was unapologetic. "I may have called Eleanor after hearing about your showdown with Ms. Winters, but she didn't have to come. That was her choice." He leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with thoughtful eyes. "Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to break through entrenched patterns to make people see what was always right in front of them." "Like my mathematical abilities?" Marcus asked. "Like the fact that talent and brilliance don't conform to people's narrow expectations," Dr. Green corrected gently. "Now shall we get to work? You've got an application to perfect." The rest of the session flew by in a blur of equations and strategies. When it was over, Marcus felt both mentally exhausted and exhilarated, the way he always did after being pushed to his intellectual limits. "Same time next week?" Dr. Green asked as they packed up. Marcus nodded, then hesitated. "Dr. Green, do you think I should join that committee at school? The one about addressing bias and inclusion?" Dr. Green considered the question seriously. "That depends. Do you want to?" "I'm not sure," Marcus admitted. "Part of me thinks it's important work, especially after everything that's happened. But another part of you wonders why it should be your responsibility to fix a broken system that you didn't break," Dr. Green suggested. "Yeah, exactly." Dr. Green nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's a legitimate question, and one that many people in your position struggle with. But let me offer another perspective. Sometimes, being in the room where decisions are made isn't about taking on the burden of fixing others' prejudices. It's about ensuring your voice and experiences are part of the conversation. Without that, even well-intentioned reforms can miss the mark." Marcus absorbed this insight, turning it over in his mind. "So you think I should do it?" "I think you should do what feels right for you," Dr. Green replied. "But I also think you have a unique opportunity to influence real change at your school. Just make sure it's on your terms and that it doesn't come at the expense of your own academic growth." On the bus ride home, Marcus reflected on Dr. Green's words and on the unexpected meeting with Dr. Choi. The events of the past few days had opened doors he hadn't even known existed, creating possibilities that stretched far beyond a single confrontation in a high school classroom. By the time he reached his apartment, he had made his decision. He found his mother in the kitchen, preparing lunch while Zoe sat at the table, working on a school project involving an alarming amount of glitter. "How was your session with Dr. Green?" Denise asked, looking up from the sandwiches she was making. "Different than usual," Marcus replied, setting down his backpack. "The director of the Stanford program was there. She came specifically to meet me." Denise's eyes widened in surprise. What? How did that happen? Marcus explained the unexpected meeting and Dr. Choi's personal invitation to apply. Dr. Green had apparently been recommending me for years, but without a teacher nomination from Westlake, it never went anywhere. A shadow crossed Denise's face, the brief flash of anger and hurt that Marcus had seen many times before when confronted with the barriers placed in her children's path. But it quickly gave way to her more characteristic determination. "Well, now you have both," she said, a fierce pride in her voice, "and they'd be fools not to accept you." "Did you meet a real Stanford professor, Marcus?" Zoe asked, momentarily looking up from her glitter-covered project. "Was she super smart like you?" Marcus smiled, ruffling her hair carefully to avoid getting glitter on his hand. "Yes to both questions, Squirt. And she was really nice, too." "I knew it," Zoe declared, returning to her project with renewed enthusiasm. "Smart people are nice. That's why you're the nicest." The simple logic of his sister's statement made Marcus laugh, easing some of the tension he'd been carrying. "I've also made a decision about that committee Dr. Hayes asked me to join," he told his mother. "I'm going to do it." Denise studied him for a moment before nodding. "I think that's the right choice. Just make sure it doesn't take over your life. Your education comes first." "That's almost exactly what Dr. Green said," Marcus noted with a smile. The following Monday after school, Marcus found himself sitting in Westlake's main conference room, surrounded by a mix of faculty members and students he barely knew. Dr. Hayes had called the first meeting of the newly formed Inclusion and Equity Committee, and despite his decision to participate, Marcus couldn't help feeling out of place among the group. At the head of the polished oak table, Dr. Hayes stood reviewing his notes, occasionally glancing at the members as they settled in. Besides Marcus, there were 4 other students: Eliza Chen, who gave him a small nod of acknowledgement; Jamal Washington, a sophomore who'd won national recognition for his debate skills; Sophia Rodriguez, the editor of the school newspaper; and David Kim, student body vice president. The faculty contingent included Ms. Winters, looking uncomfortable but present; Mr. Leibowitz from the history department; Mrs. Patel, the guidance counselor; and Coach Simmons, whose presence surprised Marcus until he remembered that the athletic director had been pushing for more diversity in sports recruitment. "Thank you all for being here," Dr. Hayes began, his deep voice commanding immediate attention. "This committee represents a new commitment from Westlake Academy to address issues of inclusion, equity, and unconscious bias within our community. Recent events have made it clear that despite our progressive mission statement, we still have significant work to do." His gaze briefly met Marcus's, an unspoken acknowledgement of the catalyst that had precipitated this gathering. "Our task is not just to identify problems, but to develop actionable solutions," Dr. Hayes continued. "I want this committee to produce tangible recommendations for policy changes, training programs, and measurable outcomes. This isn't about checking a box or making ourselves feel better. It's about creating real change." Marcus found himself nodding slightly, impressed by the principal's directness. Maybe Michael had been too cynical about administration committees after all. "Before we dive into specific agenda items, I'd like to start with a round of introductions," Dr. Hayes suggested. "Not just your name and role, but perhaps a brief statement about why you're here or what you hope this committee can accomplish." They went around the table, each person offering varying degrees of personal disclosure. Some, like Mr. Leibowitz, spoke passionately about educational equity as a moral imperative. Others, like David Kim, seemed more focused on the resume-building potential of committee membership. When Ms. Winters' turn came, she spoke carefully about learning and growth, her eyes never quite meeting Marcus's across the table. Finally, it was Marcus's turn. He hadn't prepared anything, but as all eyes turned to him, he found the words coming naturally. "I'm Marcus Johnson, Jr. I'm here because..." He paused, considering his true motivations. I'm here because what happened in Ms. Winters' class last week wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't even the worst example of bias I've seen at Westlake. It was just the one that became public. He looked around the table, meeting each person's gaze directly. I'm here because I believe in the potential of this school to be better, but that potential won't be realized through good intentions alone. It requires honest conversations and systemic changes. A brief silence followed his words. Dr. Hayes nodded appreciatively, while several committee members shifted in their seats, perhaps uncomfortable with his frankness. Marcus didn't mind the discomfort. In fact, he thought it might be necessary for any real progress. Thank you for that, Marcus, Dr. Hayes said. Your perspective is exactly what this committee needs. He turned to address the entire group. Which brings me to our first action item. I'd like us to begin by gathering data, not just statistics about demographics, but qualitative information about student experiences. We need to understand the scope and nature of the issues we're addressing. For the next hour, the committee discussed various approaches to data collection, from anonymous surveys to focus groups. Marcus found himself actively engaged, offering suggestions based on his own experiences and those of his friends. To his surprise, the other committee members listened attentively, even Ms. Winters, who occasionally jotted notes when he spoke. As the meeting progressed, Marcus felt a growing sense that perhaps this committee wasn't just a performative gesture after all. Dr. Hayes seemed genuinely committed to meaningful change, and most of the other members appeared willing to engage with difficult truths about the school culture. Before we conclude, Dr. Hayes said as the meeting was drawing to a close, I'd like to establish subcommittees to tackle specific aspects of our work. Marcus, given your unique insight, would you be willing to co-chair the Student Experience Subcommittee with Mrs. Patel? The request caught Marcus off guard. He hadn't expected to be thrust into a leadership role so quickly. He glanced at Mrs. Patel, the quiet but well-respected guidance counselor, who smiled encouragingly. Yes, I can do that, he agreed, feeling both honored and slightly overwhelmed by the responsibility. Excellent, Dr. Hayes nodded. Eliza, Jamal, would you also join that subcommittee? The four of you can meet separately to develop your approach and bring recommendations back to the full committee. After assigning the remaining members to subcommittees focused on curriculum review and faculty training, Dr. Hayes adjourned the meeting. As people gathered their materials and began to disperse, Marcus found himself approached by Mrs. Patel. I'm looking forward to working with you, Marcus, she said warmly. I've been hoping for an initiative like this for years. Change has been too slow in coming. Thanks, Marcus replied. I hope we can make a difference. With your voice leading the way, I believe we can, she said, with a conviction that surprised him. Before he could respond, she added, How about we meet Thursday during lunch to start planning our approach? I can get passes for you, Eliza and Jamal, to use my office. That works for me, Marcus agreed, feeling a new sense of purpose taking shape alongside his academic goals. As he left the conference room, he spotted Ms. Winters waiting in the hallway, apparently for him. His initial instinct was to keep walking, to avoid what might be an awkward interaction. But something in her expression, a vulnerability he'd never seen before, made him pause. Marcus, she said, his first name sounding strange from her lips after years of formal Mr. Johnson. Do you have a moment? Sure, he said, shifting his backpack from one shoulder to the other. I wanted to let you know that I submitted your nomination for the Stanford program this morning, she said, along with a rather comprehensive recommendation letter. Thank you, Marcus replied, genuinely appreciative despite their complicated history. Ms. Winters nodded, then hesitated before continuing. I also wanted to say that what you shared in the meeting about there being other incidents beyond what happened in my class It's given me a lot to think about. I wonder if you would be willing to tell me more to help me understand what I've been missing." The request was so unexpected that Marcus didn't immediately know how to respond. This was Ms. Winters, the teacher who had publicly accused him of cheating, who had systematically underestimated him for years, asking him to educate her about bias and privilege. Part of him wanted to refuse, to tell her it wasn't his job to teach her what she should already know. But another part, the part that had decided to join the committee that believed in the possibility of change, recognized the significance of her asking at all. "I'm pretty busy right now," he said finally, "with the Stanford application and this new committee. But maybe we could talk after class sometime, or you could attend one of the focus groups we're planning to organize." Relief flickered across Ms. Winters' face. "I'd like that. Thank you, Marcus." As she walked away, Marcus found himself reflecting on how much had changed in just a week. Doors that had been closed were suddenly opening. Conversations that had never happened were now taking place, and people who had seen right through him were finally seeing him clearly. The week that followed was one of the busiest of Marcus's life. Between his regular classes, the new committee responsibilities, working on his Stanford application, and helping his mother with Zoe, he barely had time to catch his breath. But unlike the stressful busyness he'd known before, this felt purposeful, each activity building toward something meaningful. The subcommittee meeting with Mrs. Patel, Eliza, and Jamal proved surprisingly productive. Together, they developed a plan for a series of student forums, safe spaces where students from underrepresented groups could share their experiences without fear of judgment or repercussions. "The key is anonymizing the data while still capturing the specificity of individual experiences," Eliza suggested, always the methodical thinker. "And making sure we hear from students across all grade levels," Jamal added. "The freshman experience is different from what seniors face." "We also need to make sure this isn't just a venting session," Marcus pointed out. "We need to organize the information in a way that points to actionable changes." Mrs. Patel watched their exchange with evident satisfaction. "This is exactly the kind of thoughtful approach I was hoping for," she said. "You three have insights that most of the faculty simply don't possess, by virtue of your own experiences and observations." By Friday afternoon, they had a detailed proposal ready to present at the next full committee meeting, including a schedule of forums, a methodology for data collection, and a framework for translating student experiences into policy recommendations. Meanwhile, Marcus had been making steady progress on his Stanford application, spending evenings and weekends working through the challenging problem sets, with occasional guidance from Dr. Green during their Saturday sessions. The more he engaged with the material, the more confident he became that he could compete at this level, regardless of the outcome. On a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks later, Marcus stood at the front of a crowded classroom watching as students from all grades filed in for the third and final student forum. The first 2 sessions had been more successful than he'd dared to hope, with dozens of students sharing stories that ranged from subtle microaggressions to blatant discrimination. "Remember," he addressed the gathering once everyone was seated, "what's shared here stays here, but the patterns and issues we identify will help shape new policies. We're not recording names, just experiences." Beside him, Eliza nodded encouragingly. "This is your chance to be heard," she added, "to help make Westlake better for everyone who comes after you." The format was simple but effective. Students could speak openly about their experiences, write anonymous accounts to be read aloud by committee members, or submit written testimonies privately. The approach had yielded a wealth of insights that confirmed what Marcus had long suspected. His confrontation with Ms. Winters had been just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. There were stories of teachers who consistently mixed up the names of Asian students, of counselors who steered Black and Latino students away from advanced courses, of administrators who enforced dress code policies more strictly for girls from certain backgrounds. Some were one-time incidents, others represented years of accumulated slights and obstacles. As the forum progressed, Marcus found himself both troubled by the breadth of issues revealed and heartened by the courage of his fellow students in sharing them. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about creating a community where everyone could thrive. "I never thought anyone would actually listen," said a sophomore girl after describing how a teacher had repeatedly ignored her raised hand while calling on white students. "I figured it was just something I had to deal with." "That's exactly why these forums matter," Jamal replied. "When we think these experiences are just personal problems, we stay isolated. But when we share them, we see the patterns." By the end of the session, they had gathered another 30 accounts to add to their growing database. As students filed out, many stopped to thank Marcus personally, seeing him as the catalyst for this new openness in discussing issues that had long been swept under the rug. "You've started something important here," Mrs. Patel told him as they gathered their materials. "The data we've collected will be impossible for the administration to ignore." "Let's hope so," Marcus replied, still cautious about institutional promises versus actual change. "Oh, I almost forgot," Mrs. Patel added, reaching into her folder. "This came for you today." She handed him an official-looking envelope with the Stanford University logo in the corner. Marcus stared at it, his heart suddenly pounding. "Is this—" "I don't know," she said, her eyes twinkling. "But it seems a bit early for acceptance letters, so it might be about your application." With slightly trembling fingers, Marcus opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As he read, his expression shifted from tense anticipation to disbelief. "What is it?" Eliza asked, peering over his shoulder. "They want me to come for an interview," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Next weekend. They're flying me out to California." "Marcus, that's incredible," Mrs. Patel exclaimed. "An interview means you've made it to the final stage of selection." "They almost never do in-person interviews," Eliza added, clearly impressed. "My brother just got a form rejection letter." Marcus read the letter again, making sure he hadn't misunderstood. "It says they were particularly impressed with my approach to the topological analysis problem and want to discuss my methodology in person." He looked up, a smile spreading across his face, despite his attempt to remain composed. "I can't believe this is happening." "Believe it," Mrs. Patel said firmly. "You've earned this opportunity, Marcus, every bit of it. That evening, the Johnson household was filled with excitement as Marcus shared the news with his mother and sister. Denise read the letter multiple times, pride shining in her eyes. "They're covering the airfare and accommodation," she noted with relief, "but you'll need some new clothes for the interview, something professional." Marcus hadn't even thought about that aspect yet. "I guess my church suit isn't going to cut it," he agreed, mentally calculating the cost of appropriate attire against their tight budget. "We'll figure it out," Denise said, recognizing his concern. "This is too important to worry about money." Zoe, who had been unusually quiet during the discussion, suddenly piped up. "Can I come to California too?" "Not this time, Squirt," Marcus said gently. "It's just a quick trip for the interview. But maybe someday if I get into college there, you can come visit." Zoe considered this compromise, then nodded solemnly. "Promise you'll take pictures of the ocean?" "Promise," Marcus agreed, ruffling her hair affectionately. The next day at school, word of Marcus's interview opportunity spread quickly among his friends and committee members. Dr. Hayes called him into his office during lunch period, a broad smile on his face. "Stanford, eh? I hear they're flying you out for an interview," the principal said. "That's exceptional, Marcus. In all my years in education, I've never known a student to receive that kind of invitation for a summer program." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied, still processing the reality of it himself. "I know this is primarily about your mathematical abilities," Dr. Hayes continued, "but I can't help thinking the way you handled yourself during that incident with Ms. Winters might have played a role too. You demonstrated character and composure under pressure, qualities that elite institutions value alongside academic excellence." Marcus hadn't considered that angle, but it made sense. His confrontation with Ms. Winters had not only opened doors at Westlake, but had somehow reached all the way to Stanford, influencing how they viewed his application. "Speaking of Ms. Winters," Dr. Hayes added, "she's requested a meeting with me to discuss implementing the blind grading system across all departments, not just in her classroom. She cited data from your forums as evidence of its necessity." He gave Marcus a knowing look. "It seems you've inspired some genuine reflection on her part." "That's surprising," Marcus admitted. "But good, I guess." "Change often comes from unexpected quarters," Dr. Hayes observed. "Now, about this interview, is there anything you need to help you prepare? The school would be happy to assist." Marcus thought about it. "Actually, yes, I could use some practice with formal interviews. I've never done anything like this before." "Say no more." Dr. Hayes nodded. "I'll arrange for you to have mock interviews with several faculty members who've served on college admissions committees. We'll make sure you're ready to impress them." By the end of the week, Marcus had participated in 3 practice interviews, received advice on everything from handshakes to how to discuss his academic interests, and, thanks to an unexpected staff collection organized by Mrs. Patel, acquired a new blazer, dress shirt, and tie for the occasion. "The faculty wanted to show their support," Mrs. Patel explained when she presented the gift. "Many of them have been deeply moved by the work you're doing with the committee, and they wanted to contribute to your success." Marcus was speechless, touched by the gesture from teachers who just weeks ago had barely seemed to notice him. It was yet another sign of how dramatically things had shifted since that fateful day in calculus class. On Friday afternoon, Dr. Green insisted on driving Marcus to the airport himself, using the journey to offer last-minute advice and encouragement. "Just be yourself," the professor said as they pulled up to the departure terminal. "They already know you're brilliant from your application. Now they want to see who you are beyond the equations." Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath to calm his nerves. "What if they ask about what happened at school? The incident with Ms. Winters?" "Then be honest," Dr. Green replied without hesitation. "Describe what happened and how you handled it. Don't downplay it, but don't dwell on it either. Remember, they're interested in you as a mathematician and as a person of character." Marcus grabbed his small suitcase from the back seat and opened the car door, then paused. "Dr. Green, I never really thanked you for everything, for believing in me even when no one at school did." The professor's expression softened. "You thank me by continuing to excel, Marcus, and by remembering, when you're at the top of your field someday, to reach back and create opportunities for others the way I've tried to do for you." With those words resonating in his mind, Marcus headed into the airport, a mixture of nervousness and excitement propelling him forward. Whatever happened in California, he knew his life had already changed in ways he couldn't have imagined a month ago. The flight to San Francisco was Marcus's first time on an airplane, an experience that might have been overwhelming if he weren't so focused on the interview ahead. He spent the journey reviewing his notes on the application problems, particularly the topological analysis that had apparently caught the attention of the selection committee. A Stanford graduate student met him at the airport, driving him to a hotel near campus where several other finalists were staying. Marcus was surprised to discover he was one of only 10 students invited for in-person interviews, an even more selective process than he'd realized. That evening, the finalists gathered for a casual dinner with some of the program faculty, including Dr. Choi. The atmosphere was deliberately informal, designed to help the students relax before the more structured interviews the following day. Marcus sat at a small table in a bright conference room, facing three distinguished mathematicians who would determine whether he earned one of the coveted spots in the Summer Mathematics Institute. Despite his nervousness, he found himself strangely calm as Dr. Choi opened the interview. "Marcus, we were particularly impressed by your solution to the topological analysis problem," she began, sliding his work across the table. "Could you walk us through your approach? It was quite unconventional." Taking a deep breath, Marcus launched into an explanation of his methodology, how he'd recognized that the traditional approach would be cumbersome and had instead developed a novel framework that simplified the analysis. As he spoke, his initial nervousness faded, replaced by the familiar confidence that always came when he immersed himself in mathematics. The panel asked penetrating questions, challenging his reasoning and proposing alternative scenarios to test his understanding. Marcus responded thoughtfully, occasionally pausing to consider a particularly complex query, but never flustered or overwhelmed. This was the intellectual engagement he'd always craved, being pushed to the edges of his knowledge by minds that respected his capabilities. "Very impressive," said Professor Hiroshi Nakamura, a Fields Medal winner whose textbook Marcus had read cover to cover. "Now, I'm curious about something else entirely. Dr. Choi mentioned an incident at your school that led to your nomination. Would you mind telling us about that?" Marcus had been prepared for this question, thanks to Dr. Green's advice. Without embellishment or resentment, he recounted the confrontation with Ms. Winters, the public demonstration of his abilities and the subsequent changes at Westlake. "And how did that experience affect you?" Professor Nakamura asked, his expression thoughtful. Marcus considered the question carefully. "It taught me that sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for others too," he replied. "The incident itself was difficult, but what came after, the committee work, the student forums, the policy changes, has shown me that one moment of courage can create ripples that extend far beyond yourself." The three interviewers exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. "One final question, Marcus," Dr. Choi said. "If you're selected for the Institute, what do you hope to gain from the experience?" "Beyond the mathematical knowledge, which of course is invaluable," Marcus began, "I hope to gain a clearer vision of what's possible. Growing up in my neighborhood, attending Westlake on scholarship, there have been times when the path forward wasn't clear, when a career in mathematics seemed more like a dream than a practical goal." He met each interviewer's gaze with quiet confidence. "I want to return home with not just new knowledge, but a roadmap for the journey ahead." Dr. Choi smiled, nodding slightly. "Thank you, Marcus. That concludes our interview. We'll be in touch within the week." As Marcus left the conference room, he felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Regardless of the outcome, he had represented himself authentically, demonstrating both his mathematical abilities and his character. He couldn't ask for more than that. The remaining day and a half in California passed in a blur of campus tours, mathematical workshops, and conversations with current Stanford students and faculty. By the time Marcus boarded his flight home on Sunday evening, his mind was brimming with new ideas and possibilities. His mother and Zoe were waiting at the airport, Zoe holding a hand-drawn sign that read, "Welcome home, math genius," decorated with glitter and mathematical symbols that bore only a passing resemblance to actual equations. "How was it?" Denise asked as they drove home after Zoe had exhausted her immediate questions about airplanes, California, and whether Marcus had seen any movie stars. "Amazing," Marcus replied, still processing everything he'd experienced. The campus, the professors, the other students, it was like stepping into a world where my kind of thinking is the norm, not the exception. Denise smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "That's how it should be everywhere." "I think I did well in the interview," he continued, "but the competition is incredible. The other finalists were all brilliant in their own ways. They weren't as brilliant as you, Zoe declared from the back seat, with unwavering loyalty. Marcus laughed. We'll see, Squirt. We'll see. The waiting was the hardest part. Marcus threw himself back into his schoolwork and committee responsibilities, trying not to check his email every 5 minutes. The student forums had concluded, and now the subcommittee was analyzing the data and preparing recommendations for the full committee. The patterns are clear, Eliza said during one of their working sessions. We've identified at least 7 systemic issues that need to be addressed, from inequitable discipline practices to curriculum gaps. And we have student testimonies to support each finding, Jamal added, organizing their documentation. They can't dismiss this as anecdotal or isolated anymore. Mrs. Patel nodded approvingly. This is exactly the kind of rigorous approach that will make your recommendations impossible to ignore. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. The following week, the subcommittee presented their findings to the full committee and Dr. Hayes. The room fell silent as Marcus, Eliza, and Jamal took turns outlining the issues they'd identified and presenting concrete recommendations for policy changes, training programs, and accountability measures. When they finished, Dr. Hayes was the first to speak. This is exceptional work, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Thorough, thoughtful, and actionable. I commit to you that these recommendations will be implemented, not shelved and forgotten. Ms. Winters, who had been unusually quiet throughout the presentation, cleared her throat. I would like to volunteer to lead the faculty training initiative, she said, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. As someone who has benefited from confronting my own biases, I think I might have a unique perspective to offer. The offer surprised Marcus, but he recognized its significance. Ms. Winters wasn't just acknowledging her mistakes. She was committing to helping other teachers avoid similar ones. I think that's a great idea, he said, earning a grateful nod from his former adversary. After the meeting, Dr. Hayes asked Marcus to stay behind. I received a call from Dr. Choi yesterday, he said once they were alone. She wanted my input on your character and leadership abilities. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. What did you tell her? The truth, Dr. Hayes replied simply, that you've demonstrated exceptional leadership, integrity, and vision. That you've turned what could have been just a personal victory into a catalyst for institutional change. That Westlake is a better place because of you. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it automatically, then froze as he saw the email notification, Stanford Summer Mathematics Institute, decision. It's them, he whispered, suddenly unable to breathe properly. Dr. Hayes understood immediately. Do you want privacy to read it? Marcus shook his head. After everything that had happened, it felt right that Dr. Hayes should be present for this moment, whatever the outcome. With trembling fingers, he opened the email and began to read. His expression remained impassive for several seconds, then slowly, a smile spread across his face. I got in, he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and joy. They accepted me. Dr. Hayes's face broke into a wide grin. He extended his hand, which Marcus shook in a daze. Congratulations, Marcus. Truly well-deserved. The news spread quickly throughout Westlake. By the end of the day, it seemed everyone knew that Marcus Johnson had been one of just 20 students, nationwide selected for the prestigious Stanford program. Teachers who had barely noticed him before stopped him in the hallway to offer congratulations. Students who had never spoken to him suddenly knew his name. But the most meaningful reactions came from those closest to him. Dr. Green's proud smile when Marcus showed him the acceptance email. His mother's tears of joy as she called everyone in the extended family to share the news. Zoe's insistence on telling her entire elementary school class that her brother was officially the smartest person ever. I knew you'd get in, Dina told him at lunch the day after the announcement. You're literally the most brilliant person I know." "It's still sinking in," Marcus admitted. 6 weeks at Stanford, working with some of the top mathematicians in the world, it doesn't feel real yet." "Well, it is real," Michael chimed in. "And it's just the beginning for you, man." Marcus nodded, appreciating his friend's enthusiasm, but still processing the reality of his acceptance. The Stanford program was indeed just the beginning, a stepping stone to opportunities he was only starting to envision. That afternoon in calculus class, Ms. Winters handed back their latest tests, the numerical codes of the blind grading system ensuring fairness in her evaluations. When she reached Marcus's desk, she paused. "Perfect score again, Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice carrying a respect that had been absent for so long. "Not that I'm surprised anymore." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "Stanford is fortunate to have you joining them this summer." "Thank you, Ms. Winters," Marcus replied, accepting both the test and the compliment with grace. As May turned to June and the school year drew to a close, Marcus found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past few months. What had begun as a moment of public humiliation had transformed into a catalyst for change, not just for him but for the entire Westlake community. The Inclusion and Equity Committee's recommendations were being implemented across departments. The blind grading system had been adopted by most teachers. Student forums had become regular events, creating spaces for ongoing dialogue about challenges and solutions. And perhaps most importantly, there was a new awareness among faculty and administrators about the invisible barriers that had for too long shaped students' experiences. On the last day of school, Marcus cleaned out his locker, sorting through papers and notebooks that chronicled his junior year. At the bottom of the pile, he found the Stanford brochure that Ms. Winters had given him that fateful day, the day everything had started to change. "Ready for summer, math genius?" called a voice behind him. He turned to find Eliza approaching, her own locker already emptied. "More than ready," he replied with a smile. "It's been quite a year." "That's an understatement," she said. "You know, when school starts again in September, things will be different because of what you started. That's pretty remarkable." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with taking too much credit. It was a group effort. The committee, the students who shared their stories, Dr. Hayes, even Ms. Winters in her own way, everyone contributed. "True," Eliza conceded, "but it all began with you standing up for yourself in that classroom. Don't forget that." As they walked out of Westlake's front doors into the bright June sunshine, Marcus thought about how far he had come since that day in Ms. Winters' classroom. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. Financial concerns about college, ongoing resistance to some of the committee's recommendations, the persistent reality of bias in the world beyond Westlake's walls. But for the first time, those challenges didn't seem insurmountable. He had found his voice, and in doing so, had helped others find theirs too. Whatever came next, Stanford, college applications, graduate school, a career in mathematics, he would face it with the confidence of knowing his own worth and the courage to stand up for it. "Hey," Eliza said as they reached the parking lot, interrupting his thoughts. "Have a great summer, Marcus. Show those Stanford professors what you're made of." "I will," he promised, not just to Eliza but to himself. "Believe me, I will."